Turn it up. Look, 100 years after 100 years, they done lied to us about this and that. Told us all we from Africa. I made fiction characters turn into facts. Heard you tell me then it was not. Knowing goddamn well that trick was cap. My wife and I wrote a book about it. It's a book with knowledge, evidence, and fact. And my other book got them haters shook, cause it's helping my people take a closer look at their backgrounds in the background, showing my people where they supposed to look. Showing my people where they get it from, where they hit it from, all sorts of angles. When it comes to this research, you must please first, don't trust strangers. Find out all on your own is what I highly recommend and suggest. And if you looking for answers and content about me, I highly recommend you the best, which is my website at the link you see just across the screen. Don't let it miss you, I make it simple. I double down on that black and white, it's too official.
OCO, beautiful people. In today's video, we will be covering the misconceptions concerning supremacy amongst races of people and how it is illusory but continues to plague people's minds due to influential propaganda and fear-mongering. In most cases, the public will turn a blind eye toward everyday occurrences of these tactical social engineering experiments, because they are persuaded to look in other directions or point the blame on correlating subjects, entities, or even conspirators presented in relation to those matters. So many will miss the point of why particular events have occurred in the past, or why they may reoccur merely based on the public's ignorance of their enemies' investing interests in their mental demise, leading the general public to a point of no return, while their enemies await for their return on their investment. But history only repeats itself if you allow it. So being cognizant of the unpopular truth is critically essential when combating a world full of entertaining lies, allowing a person to gain the courage to fight against the fear of being in control of themselves. Of themselves, of themselves, of themselves, of themselves, of themselves. This is why fear is the most powerful motivator. For example, when marketers want to motivate you to buy their products, they use fear as often as they can. According to Psychology Today, quote, they present a scenario they hope will invoke our sense of fear. Then they show us a solution, a path back to our comfort zone that entails using their product or solution. This was the same utilitarian ideology of the late 1800s and early 1900s, as nationalist clubs became trendy establishments throughout America. Fostered by the likes of Edward Bellamy, nationalist movements gained traction upon the release of his utopian novel called Looking Backward, which became the best-selling book published in 1888. It was said that the book offered solutions to the social and economic problems of that time frame through the storytelling of the book's main character, Julian West, who falls asleep during the year 1887 only to wake up again in the year 2000, discovering that a cooperative system had replaced capitalism. The national groups that were developed due to this book were characterized by establishing units of propaganda in order to educate the public along the lines of nationalism. The term nationalism is defined as a devotion to one's country, natural spirit, or aspirations. It is the desire for national unity and prosperity. This was also the era when white supremacy began to appear, as nationalist groups like the Ku Klux Klan began to infiltrate many social and political organizations, and even the government, with reconstructive plans that they hoped would ensure the survival of the white race. This in part is also known as the survival of the fittest. The issue with these particular nationalist groups is that they did not want to contend with the thought of another race being in absolute control of them. Although these groups are stating that they want equality in the form of a democracy, what they truly desire is yet their hidden agenda, which lies along the basis of achieving supremacy above all other races. So, with the emergence of these nationalist groups, the days of America being great for the Needy were, over time, systematically changed in favor of America's power brokers, who are now funding an illegitimate democracy. Listen closely. According to Edward Bellamy on equality, to ascertain a complete revolution on the economic basis of society, there first needs to be a democratic movement, quote, by which personal and class rule in political matters is overthrown. He stated, "It is astonishing that there should have been any intelligent persons among you who did not perceive that political democracy was but the pioneer corpse and advanced guard of economic democracy, clearing the way and providing the instrumentality for the substantial part of the program, namely the equalization of the distribution of work and wealth, of work and wealth.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false news
has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, and this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. To our democracy. To our democracy. To our democracy.
While often categorized as a democracy, the United States is more accurately defined as a constitutional federal republic. And what that means is that the government in the United States is based on a constitution, which is the supreme law of the United States. According to the National Constitution Center, in a reflection on democratic constitutionalism, quote, "The Constitution is the law of lawmaking. It structures and limits the powers of government. Sometimes the Constitution speaks in precise and unambiguous terms. It also goes on to state that often constitutional provisions are elliptical and incomplete, filled with grand abstractions. The Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate commerce." This means that although the Constitution is written and perceived to be worded as being clearly defined with exact statements, it is filled with wording that only appears to supply a person with jurisdiction and equal protection, but it is attributive, omitting who is to receive the benefit of one's agreeance. And it goes even further, by replacing any form of government that could have already been in use, whether internal or external. Many people may be unfamiliar with the form of government that existed prior to this government that we know of by way of compulsory public and charter schools throughout America. It is a government that existed before we decided to vote in the 1850s, and way before we decided to agree with rules set forth as guidelines or policies within our constitutional federal republic as a democracy. Before a random stranger demonstrated to each of us through schooling what a government should look like, we had general senses relating to our nature, our character, and the condition of our mind. We had our constitution, and our actions reflected our desires without any form of controlling influence. In other words, we were able to exercise personal authority, and we could think. In a pure democracy, laws are made directly by the voting majority, leaving the rights of the minority largely unprotected. And in a republic, laws are made by representatives chosen by the people and must comply with the Constitution that specifically protects the rights of the minority from the will of the majority. The problem with this was, and still is, that when we are in school and taught about government, it's an external government only. This was in order to overpower our own reasoning for self-government or to self-govern. We were told that a democracy and someone else's constitution was the only way things had been done since the creation of our country. We were told that the reason why our constitution starts with "we the people" was due to the laws created and mandated through our constitution, which would only work in favor of the people. However, we were unfortunately not the people that this constitution intended to protect. "We the people" referred directly to the society or organization that incorporated itself as the government of the United States, previously known as the Union. The Union.
Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, "we the people." Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part, all of us. If we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America.
So let me ask you, how many of you feel as if your voice is actually heard when it pertains to the laws that are created? Are they really done in the best interest of the people? And if so, which people? Somehow down the line, we as a people allowed ourselves to be lowered into a settled condition, blinded by an illusion, where we inadvertently gave strangers the power of authority. But don't beat yourself up about this, because at the time of this occurring, our ancestors were vulnerable children. Children who were swayed by the influence of a stranger that appeared to be greater, more intelligent, and more powerful than we thought we were. But keep in mind that this was merely an illusion. The word supremacy stems from the word supreme, which is defined as highest in rank, power, or authority, highest in degree or quality. And before we move forward, I think it is important to note who holds the power in a republic. In a republic, power is held by the people and their representatives in government, or so it seems. A simple breakdown of the word republic will direct you to the truth and give you a better understanding of where the power resides. The word republic is comprised of two words, the prefix "re" and "public." It is understood that the prefix "re" is typically used in reference to a return of something that already exists. It is meant to bring something about once more, as if to renew. and the word public is defined as something that concerns the people as a whole. But in this context, it is actually referring to something that is existing in open view. Publicly. A republic is another way of saying a readjustment or reorganization, which is essential to note that it is similar to a reconstruction. To create the republic that this democracy was referring to, something must be given to garner the concern of the people as a whole. In present day, fear is being used for this reason. It must be shared openly for all of the people of a country to take part in prior to a new idea or thing or device being inserted, which would be patriotism during this particular time. And for this reason alone, the Pledge of Allegiance was born. A pledge of allegiance to the new flag presented by the new government. Because at the time, there were other flags pre-existing. So a code of conduct was created to take the place of any pre-existing flags that predate the reconstruction of the government in 1877. In 1877. In 1877. In 1877. In 1877. In America, during the Reconstruction period, French, German, Irish, and British immigrants, just to name a few, who made America their new home, sought to find a peaceful way for revolution. They longed for a democratic and nonviolent approach in order to be accepted in American society. Doesn't that sound all too familiar? This was a very hard time for immigrants because of the excessive poverty they were encountering after migrating to America. And this inequality was being perceived as the furthering of slavery amongst the white race, as these newcomers had to work in order to become established. They saw the beautiful lives that the Neji had already established. And because we were not sharing with these strangers or being open towards their standards, we were regarded as being niggardly, which is an extremely stingy person. The government created by the 13 colonies was still in place, but it didn't have a firm footing as a form of control that reigned supreme over the Neji of America. The political structure of a democracy was still being introduced, along with the idea of voting as a solution to recurring problems. During this time period of Reconstruction, intermediate social structures were put in place in the form of voting through the use of representatives to mediate relations within the state. And the formation of this political structure allowed for a stranger's traditional hierarchy to be easily formed. Once this political structure was put in place, nationalist groups like the Ku Klux Klan sabotaged elections to detour motivation in hopes of hijacking political infrastructures. This type of political propaganda was used in two ways. It was used to not only create fear, but it was also used to spread it on a national level, all while gaining traction for the voting system to be implemented among the masses. Because the only way to have a foreigner placed at the top and eventually have the Neji as a people placed at the bottom, the Neji must agree to include themselves within this political pyramid scheme, which is the illusion of inclusion. And the best way for this to be accomplished was to introduce all of this to the children in the form of stages that would produce successful results. According to the archives of the Vindicator Printing Company, on June 14, 1889, Colonel George Balch, a kindergarten teacher in New York City, planned appropriate ceremonies for the children of his school, and his idea of observing Flag Day was later adopted by the State Board of Education of New York. George Balch was the founder of the flag salute and the founder of the patriotic teaching in public schools. On June 29, 1889, an article written for the New York Times states Colonel George T. Balch delivered an address to the teachers of the industrial schools of the Children's Aid Society about a general plan for the patriotic education of the youth of our nation. The article states that George Balch corresponded with the educational agents of various states and territories, and the reports and statistics that he received gave him great confidence in the educational system and dissipated his fears as to the future of the government. He believed that in this country, the condition of the working people will have a great influence upon the safety of the government and country. End quote. It is important to note that the word condition is used here to create an environment of agreement, to have a significant influence over something so that you can bring it to the desired state for your use. And so the article continues discussing patriotism as a form of conditioning for children, as it states, quote, patriotism and the knowledge of the principle upon which the government rests are the mainstays of the country. So the colonel came to the conclusion that the cultivation of patriotism was necessary, not only in public schools, but also in the private and in the denominational schools. It is necessary, he believes, to impress the children with a sense of their obligations to the country. End quote. George Balch is recognized as the creator of the very first Pledge of Allegiance, which was stated by poor and immigrant kindergartners. We give our heads and our hearts to God and our country, one language, one flag. The children taught at the school at which George Balch created the Pledge of Allegiance are students who are taught to belong to a large extent to the, quote, neglected or dangerous class. How to bring up these children is the question for solution. It is only of late that systemized efforts have been made to instill patriotism into the rising generation. The colonel was in favor of hoisting the American flag over every school during school hours and presenting the most successful class a United States flag to be kept during good behavior. The standard bearer he would have elected by the class. He also recommended the awarding of small flags to be worn as badges for a week to the industrious and well-behaved children. The colonel proposes to get a lot of flags and badges and to distribute them among the schools of the society. End quote. 2 years later, President Benjamin Harrison issued a proclamation to honor Columbus Day with ceremonies in schools and other places of assembly. This in turn will be what was used as the scapegoat for the reason why there should be a sudden rush of patriotism toward the flag, which is the symbol utilized as a sigil for the unsuspecting, carefree, vulnerable children. The word sigil is defined as a sign, word, or device said to have occult power in astrology or magic, an inscribed or painted symbol considered to have magical power. The insertion of the Pledge of Allegiance was disguised as an honor to the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' voyage and will hide the real motives set forth. It was this patriotic teaching that ultimately led to democratic conformity, because once a fearful event is produced, a child will, in turn, resort to what made them the most comfortable. Once the children have blindly pledged their allegiance, the desired results will ensue. And this leads us to the person that's given the most credit for creating the Pledge of Allegiance, as he was commissioned to do so. The Youth's Companion was the first publication written for children in 1827, and in 1891, its publisher and editor, Daniel Ford, hired Francis Bellamy, a Socialist Baptist church minister, for the Youth's Companion, Columbus Quadricentennial Project. Daniel Ford's nephew was struggling to compose a pledge to the flag, so Francis Bellamy was asked if he could do a better job. And before he even composed the pledge, Francis Bellamy was named chairman of the Committee for the National Education Association in February of 1892. It wasn't until August of 1892 that Francis Bellamy composed the pledge. Quote, "I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." The pledge was approved along with an accompanying gesture, which was coming to attention, snapping together the heels upon beginning the recitation, and while speaking, extending the right arm, hand palm up. Note that this was prior to enlisting the gesture of saluting the flag, military style, later on. According to American History magazine, more than half of the country's 120,000 public schools participated in the October 1892 National Public Schools celebration. And it was Francis Bellamy's views that looked warily on capitalism and expressed sympathy for the working man, which initially impressed Daniel Ford to hire him for such an important job in the first place. Francis Bellamy's views drew on the philosophy of his novelist cousin, Edward Bellamy, the father of the nationalist movement that I mentioned earlier in this segment. In 1916, President Woodrow Wilson issued an official proclamation establishing June 14th as Flag Day. Then, 7 years later, to standardize flag etiquette and help immigrants incorporate into the body of the U.S., the representatives of the Army and the Navy and close to 70 other national groups convened in Washington, D.C. for a National Flag Conference on June 14, 1923. Prior to this Flag Day, there were no federal or state regulations formally governing flags display, but it was on this date that the National Flag Code was adopted. One of the many nationalist groups that attended this conference was the Women of the Ku Klux Klan, and in acknowledgement of their presence, they released a pamphlet entitled The Code of the Flag. Written inside of the pamphlet was an affirmation stating, quote, "We stand for the American flag against enemies without and within. We emphasize devotion to the flag of our country as the ensign of our American nationality and the emblem of our national honor. A man or woman stands wholly for the stars and stripes, or else to them their country's flag is only a dirty rag. We insist that no flag shall fly above our flag, and that no flag shall float by its side." End quote. This royally debunks all rumors of the Ku Klux Klan utilizing the Confederate flag of the South in representation of their organization in its entirety. It was the United States flag that we know of today that represented their nationalist group, among other correlating nationalist groups that were established during this era of promoting a resurgence of a brand new democracy that enables white supremacy, or rather referring to foreigner supremacy, over all indigenous Niji of America. But since history is allowed to repeat itself only because of the public's ignorance of their enemy's deceitful hidden agenda, then this means that the revolving cycle can and will be broken once 13% of the free-thinking public becomes cognizant of the truth, affirming their own pledge of allegiance to resisting foreign influence by simply repeating this chant out loud, directed to their enemies without any fear. What goes up must come down, must come down. I'm just here to make you think.